Hi, my name is Carmen, and I am an early childhood special education teacher, a life and ADHD coach, and I'm the host of this podcast, Authentically ADHD. I created this podcast to help anyone wondering if they have ADHD, people who have been diagnosed for a while and want some more support and community. I'm here to bring you the latest research on ADHD and neurodiversities while we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of ADHD. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hi, my friend, and welcome back to the podcast. How are you doing? I am finally on spring break. It is the first day of my spring break today, being Saturday, and it's snowing, but it wouldn't be a spring break in Chicago if it wasn't snowing. So, we are here to talk about a really, really interesting topic, and the irony of it is that it includes the topic of hyperfocus, which I did fall into while writing and researching for this episode. But first, I wanted to let you know that you can listen to these episodes early and access my huge library of ADHD resources in my Patreon, along with, hopefully, as I'm building a community of people who feel the same ways that you do, so they understand. It's so important to have community when you are neurodiverse. If you listen to anything that Dr. Russell Barkley or, any of the ADHD head honchos say, community is really important. So I really hope to connect with you there, okay? I hope to see you there. If you're one of the first ones there, you're going to get a shout out. You're going to be celebrated. So, all right. Today, we are talking about attention, the different ways that it presents for neurotypical brains and for ADHD brains. And this will help you to take some of these, the ways that we think and use them to your advantage, when you can, at least. So if you've been listening to the podcast for any amount of time, you know that ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, has nothing to do with a deficit in our attention at all. We actually have plenty of attention. The problem is the regulation or control of our own attention. It's where we want to focus our attention and the type of attention available to us at the time, along with any external or internal distraction that may come up for us. Now you may be thinking, distraction, those are really only external. But remember those intrusive thoughts that we have and emotions. Those are the internal distractions that I'm talking about. Speaking of extra supports, I just wanted to tell you all that I've updated my Patreon page to include all of the resources that I've really ever made to be held in one place. Just head to my show notes. The VIP members do get a little extra, but you can also purchase my brand new Ultimate ADHD journal and planner, which I've been using for the past year, that has worked. Nothing is priced over $10, and everything is at least 50 to 100 pages. that you can download and print. You can get it binded and sent to you, or you can just read it off your screen and use notebook paper. So if you want or need any type of that kind of extra support, just head to my show notes and click the Patreon link to join. I hope to see you in there. So throughout this episode, I'm going to go through the 4 basic types of attention, how they develop in a typically developing brain, and then how they look different in the ADHD brain. And then we are also going to take a look at hyperfocus. Are you ready? Let's get started. So, the 4 main types of attention that develop in the human brain are 1. Sustained attention, 2. Divided attention, 3. Selective attention, and 4. Executive attention. So we're going to start with sustained attention. Sustained attention in a neurotypical brain is the ability to keep your attention on or focus on a person, a conversation, a task, or activity until it is complete. An analogy that I've heard to visualize this a little bit is kind of like up in your brain, the ability to use an imaginary flashlight in order to, shine it where you want to focus and make it stay there until the task or, whatever it is complete. In the ADHD brains, it develops differently. We do not have that flashlight to shine on that one thing. Instead, what we have is like a disco ball, and we're constantly trying to regulate or control it by like running around it and trying to tape over, some of the lights so that it can focus on one thing and to gain this attention or focus and essentially to complete a task. Now, there are times that some people who have ADHD experience hyperfocus, a type of attention that we're going to dive into later. But sustained attention requires the ability to kind of block out that other stimuli that you have and what's around you, the distracting thoughts that come up while you're trying to focus. Okay? It also requires a level of impulse control to not follow every or any distraction that may come along. For example, you're doing the dishes, but you realize that you need a clean towel. And say your clean towels for some reason are in a different room, and you go in that room to get the towel, and then all of a sudden you're doing something completely different, and you've left the water running in the kitchen. No, this is not a real life example of what I've done. No, yes, I'm lying. It totally is. But it really requires that impulse control. It also requires working memory to remember the task you are trying to stay focused on and the steps it takes to complete it. It also requires a level of problem solving for anything that may come up during the time in sustained attention. We are able to have sustained attention. It just may not be in the area we want. For example, we're able to sustain attention during class, but it may not be on the teacher or the concept that's being taught. We just might be doing something completely off topic, like doodling or writing something else or on our phones. Unless you're sitting in a class that you enjoy, then it's a little different because of our interest-based nervous systems, okay? That's why we can sometimes hold sustained attention on certain things. The next type of attention is called divided attention. Neurotypical people are able to focus on more than one thing at a time, like holding a conversation while doing busy work. Now, I'm not saying ADHDers can't do this, but divided attention is kind of like multitasking. And even though it's more available in the neurotypical brain, that doesn't mean that it's always effective for neurotypicals or neurodivergent brains. The other part of this type of attention involves the ability to move seamlessly from task to task, aka cognitive flexibility, which I have a whole episode on if you scroll on back into the 100 episodes that I have. But it's the ability to transition from the car into work, or from work brain to home brain, or from one task to another task. It's more natural for the neurotypical person to arrange those tasks in priority order and in their mind, and then take action and move through the tasks seamlessly. Now, we bump into a problem right away because our brains do not prioritize our tasks in their priority order. More like all of the things that we think we have to do are all on, the same level, and they're all super important. It's like my coach says, it's like they're all screaming at you at the same volume. And we just want to cover our ears and scream because it's so, so overwhelming. So the case for most ADHD people is that we have a hard time transitioning from task to task, from place to place, and from one mindset to another mindset. This is called cognitive flexibility. It's also referred to as transitioning or set shifting. Our brains take longer and or need a little help to stop one task and move to the next priority task. And I'm not talking about getting distracted, but an intentional way to move from task to task to be productive on our priorities. This is really because our brains lack time management, planning, problem solving, and especially in the moment because of our difficulties with emotional regulation. I give a lot of credit to my coach, Kristen Carter, because she has taught me a lot of these things. Now, this podcast all came from research, but my ideas and tips and things like that, those come from Focused. If you want to hear a little bit more, stay tuned. Hey ADHDer, are you looking for more support with your brain? Do you crave community with people who understand you? You should really check out Focused, the group coaching program I am a part of that is for adults with ADHD. It's made and run by none other than Kristen Carter of the I Have ADHD podcast. I've grown so much by being in this program, using the tools, and being in the community for over a year now. If you use the link in my show notes, we both save money on this or next month's cost. So I think it's worth it. Go check it out at ihaveadhd.com/focused. The next type of attention is called selective attention. Selective attention develops in a neurotypical brain as they are able to focus on one task while blocking out any external or internal distracting stimuli. For example, they're able to read a book in a coffee shop with all the people, sounds, and smells, or being able to ignore the random thought that they should be doing another task. That task over there is more important. This task and that task and all these different things. Another term for selective attention is cognitive inhibition. Yep, you got that right. It's the inhibition cognitively. In the ADHD brain, in order to have selective attention, you must be able to manage and control your impulsive thoughts, behaviors, and essentially tune out irrelevant stimuli. This is the regulation of attention, and we do not have the type of brain that does this naturally. We are naturally impulsive. We follow our distractions, and depending on your level of sensitivity to external stimuli, we may not be able to hold attention in a place that is noisy, a place that has a bunch of different smells or smells that we don't like, busy places, or places with a lot of visual stimuli. Sometimes we need a quiet place to work with minimal distractions because we lack the executive function to regulate our emotions, our impulses, and our overall attention. It's not like we choose to be this way. It's literally how our brains are wired. It's how they develop. They are developed to naturally follow distractions, impulsively change our mind, and, impulsively leave the dishes and the water running to go get a towel. And an hour later, I don't know, you're making a bracelet or something, and you realize that the water's still running in the kitchen and you've done 3 other tasks, but the dishes still aren't done. That vital task still isn't done because we lack that executive function to regulate, essentially, ourselves. The next type of attention, which is actually the last to fully develop in all brains, is executive attention. This type of attention, it's similar to selective attention in that you are able to block out any internal or external stimuli to complete a task. But the difference is that the task that it is related to is achieving a certain goal. So with selective attention tasks, it may look like household chores, paying bills, doing the laundry, things like that. But executive attention has to do with, a project at your job, tasks related to your passion, like completing podcast episodes or paperwork that you need to complete, because they go on a longer plane of time. Usually these projects for neurotypical and neurodivergent people, usually they take, more than a couple days. It's a longer type of sustained attention that involves the executive functions of planning, organizing, prioritizing, working memory, self-awareness, self-motivation, self-reflection, impulse control, emotional regulation, and time management. And I'm sure there are more, but I decided to stop listing executive functions right there because I was annoying myself. In neurotypical brains, tasks are prioritized naturally. They even have an internal voice that helps them along the way. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? I didn't think that was a thing. I didn't think that internal voices developed in a nice way. I thought everybody's internal voice was a huge, mean person. because mine definitely was till I started working with her in there. But they have an internal voice helping them along the way that's and they may have another voice that's still like mean to them, like our internal voices are sometimes mean to us, but they have like a little executive assistant internal voice that like tells them what they need to do, helps them remember, and not forget their keys, wallet, phone, and all the different things before they leave the house, or to remember that, little Joey has soccer practice after work, so you got to drive him there, like, how unfair. It's okay to have emotions about this. It is okay because our brains develop differently, which means life was harder and is harder for the neurodiverse person. Because in the ADHD brain, the executive functions, which are held in that prefrontal cortex, if you touch your forehead, that's right around where they all are, and they're not fully developed. Our prefrontal cortex also takes longer to develop, and usually they have found in the research, it usually never fully develops, leaving us with difficulty with prioritizing, planning, making decisions, working memory, impulse control, self-awareness, transitioning, emotional regulation, and overall, really, self-regulation. It is very, very difficult for the ADHDer to create an end goal, then think about all of the steps that you need to get there. And usually we need to visualize these things. We're not good at that either. And then prioritize and plan out the steps to get to that end goal on time or early. That's why we end up with boxes half full of half finished projects. And this is also why we always have that looming feeling of not being productive. We are not used to completing these projects or even keeping up with the household work during the day because of all that goes into ADHD. We have such a hard time. This is why you are not finishing that project in the basement or over there on the table, okay? It's because of our brain and it not being fully developed. This is scientific research that is really everywhere, okay? But I just make it easy to access and understand. The papers that I had to read through to understand this attention thing is they're really complicated. I end up throwing a lot of the pages out because they don't have to do with much besides, I look at the validity of the study, I look at how they tested people, and in a lot of these things, it was literally by giving them tasks to do and timing them or having them estimate the amount of time they thought it was going to take. One of the studies was huge and it was done pretty recently. I don't tend to use any research older than about 2018 because that's about when research started raising for ADHD. It's one of the reasons that I do this podcast is because there is not enough information, and there's also not enough information available to all of us. That they don't make it easy to understand. They don't make it easy to access. I have a membership to a research paper site, only one of them, the best one that I love, in order to read those papers because they're easier for me to understand. And they also have some of the latest research. Like I say in my intro, that's why we're here, is so that I can do this for you. So I can do this with you, okay? Because life with ADHD is hard. So we're trying to make it just a little bit easier. If you are are enjoying this podcast, I want to remind you, my ADHD friend, that our memories suck. So please scroll up and hit that follow button so my new episodes stream right into your favorite podcast app library. And if you could also be a huge rock star and share this episode with a friend or on social media, it would be so incredibly appreciated. Make sure to tag me at authenticallyaDHD_podcast so I can shout you out. Also, while you're up by that follow button, especially on Spotify, giving the podcast a quick 5-star rating helps enormously when trying to reach as many ADHDers as I can. It works like the algorithms in all the social medias, and it will push this podcast out to other people who have other ADHD podcasts in their library. I would absolutely love it if you could do that. One last favor, if you have the capacity, I would love it if you're on an app that can allow you to leave a review. I love to read reviews in the beginning of my shows, so I'd love to shout you out for that too. All right, thank you so much. Now, back to the show. All right, after covering those 4 types of attention, now we're going to look into the concept known as hyperfocus, or a state of flow for the ADHDer. This concept is what sometimes holds people back from being diagnosed, because other people who do not understand or do not experience hyperfocus see it from the outside and assume that we can focus and that we are in control of that focus, and we're not. And we don't choose to focus on the stuff that we don't like. We only choose to hyperfocus usually, on that stuff that we enjoy and or spend, they see a child, can't focus on anything at school. Oh, but he's able to focus, so much on these electronics when he's playing his video games or on his tablet. Yes, because it's a constant stream of dopamine. I want to talk about what hyperfocus really is, the science behind it, and some of the downfalls of hyperfocus. Because although I do think it's useful at times, it can also be detrimental in a few ways. Some people with ADHD do not experience hyperfocus or flow. It all depends on the person. Like I always say, if you've met one person with ADHD, you've only met one person with ADHD. Here's the thing. People with ADHD have interest-based and urgency-driven nervous systems. This means that when we are doing or learning about something that we find interesting, it's easier to have that sustained attention that is usually more difficult for us to access. This is true with urgency and deadline-driven work as well. Have you ever seen an ADHDer whip up a paper that's due the next day, the night before? That involves urgency and a deadline, which we most likely procrastinated or forgot about. The issue that we have with this is that we do the paper that's due the next day overnight, but then we may sleep through the class where we're supposed to turn it in, because it's the adrenaline of that urgency that helps produce the missing or low chemical interactions that help us with sustained focus and attention, self-motivation, leading to a state of zoned in focus, also called hyperfocus. Then there's the interest-based hyperfocus that usually revolves around some type of special interest that we have. Now, special interests that term is dedicated in the autism spectrum community, okay? It's something that's only newly being used in ADHD research. I do believe that people who have ADHD, in the science, in the research, it says that about 60% of people who have ASD also have ADHD and vice versa. So I don't want to discredit the special interests that are of the autism spectrum community because it's a little bit different for ADHDers. Our special interests can change quickly or over time, and we usually have like short little bursts. Okay, children who have special interests who have autism usually, say for instance, a little boy has a hyper interest of Spider-Man. He's going to have that special interest for most of his childhood. For me as a kid, I had different special interests. The overall special interest was books, but I liked to find series, right? So I read Junie B. Jones, I read The Babysitter's Club, and then I read Harry Potter, and then Twilight, the Twilight series. I changed within my special interest. I hope I'm making sense here because they can be anything: topics, sports, history, music, and the list can go on and on and on and on. Some people like to make things. Some people like to do things. Some people like to learn about things. It's all different depending on the person. I get hyper-focused about learning about the brain and the ways that being neurotypical versus being neurodivergent changes in each brain and how they work and what that means for people who are neurodiverse like me. And don't get me wrong, like hyperfocus, it could be great when you are working towards a goal with your interest, such as me learning about ADHD and writing podcast episodes to help you, my listener. Another example may be making music or exercising. The problems that come along when the interest isn't goal-based but dopamine-based, like scrolling social media or playing a video game. Now, don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that it's bad to do those things, but according to the research, our time blindness kicks in and we lose track of how long we are engaging in those activities. And we all know that scrolling social media for hours or playing video games for hours is not something that we want to be doing or hyper focusing on. It's not great for our brain. Even when the hyper focus is lending toward a goal or an achievement, there are a few downfalls. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I want to talk about what hyperfocus actually is, because in a lot of the podcasts that I've listened to, hyperfocus isn't explained the way that I feel that it could be explained. So I'm taking my own research, my own knowledge, and I'm going to give it to you. Hyperfocus happens when a person with ADHD becomes so focused on a task or project, either interest-based or urgency-based, for a long period of time, usually hours. We usually get so involved in the task that we forget to do things like eat, stay hydrated, and really anything in our surroundings. We actually are able to tune out. Time seems to speed up or not exist. Okay? And it is this insane focus on the thing you are doing. I have been writing a podcast before and looked up, and 2 hours had passed. Okay? Interest-based hyperfocus is more common, and it happens when we are interested or enjoy the thing that we're doing. These things can range from doing ADHD research, creating things, creating content, playing a specific game, listening to or reading a book, podcasts, writing, and so many other things. When hyperfocus is urgency based, there is usually a fast approaching deadline in which a specific task or project is due. To some people, this may look like a really cool gift from an outsider's perspective. And I'm not going to lie, hyperfocus has helped me in a ton of ways. But just like anything in life, too much for too long has its downfalls. We forget to meet our basic needs, and it can affect our relationships even, because we can also fall in and out of hyperfocus with people in our lives as well. I'm going to repeat that part because I feel like it's important. I feel like not enough people know this. Hyperfocus applies to people too. We can fall in and out of hyperfocus with different people in our lives, like a boyfriend, a best friend, a girlfriend. Like making a new friend. This is sometimes why we scare people off, or why we end up drifting away from people for quote unquote no reason. It's because we lost the hyperfocus, my friend. And in romantic relationships that last a long time, that has to be dealt with in order to keep the relationship going long term. So in the research, which there is very little of about specifically hyperfocus, but I did find some, and they refer to hyperfocus as a struggle to regulate our attention and set shift or transition to a new task. This makes a lot of sense because usually when we are in hyperfocus, we are not focusing on the most important task. So we end up like using it to avoid other tasks and engage in our special interest because it's feeding our brains with that constant dopamine. Often, when a person with ADHD is in hyperfocus, time seems non-existent. And if we are interrupted, it can be extremely irritating. Like, I put a sign on the basement door when I do these recordings saying, "Do not enter, recording in progress," because being interrupted in the middle of recording is almost painful for me. I actually get angry. About it. Do you resonate? Like, can I get an amen? Because being interrupted when I'm researching or writing the podcast is also extremely irritating. It's distracting. All right, let me hop off that soapbox. I'm getting a little wired. I'm a little wound up, so let's calm back down. Take a deep breath. Okay, I want to be clear when I say that this episode is not meant to shame the way that we attend to things. The types of attention are what they are, and we struggle with what we struggle with, okay? It's our brains. It's the way that they are wired. It's the way that they develop. And these things are what make us neurodivergent thinkers, and that we can learn to work with our brain and our attention by being aware of what we struggle with, what we are good at, and how we can support ourselves in the things that we struggle with. If you feel that hyperfocus coming on, grab a snack and some water and use the bathroom before jumping down the rabbit hole. If you're feeling extra distracted, give yourself grace. You have ADHD, my friend. You are a human. You are not a robot. Like I say, knowledge is power, and self-awareness is the key. I really, really hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I enjoyed writing it. And I'd love to hear your takeaways and any other topics that you'd maybe like me to cover in my upcoming episodes. I am planning on keyword, planning on doing a few interviews soon because I am on spring break. So if you are interested or want to share your stories or your takeaways with me, please connect with me. I'm on Instagram as at authentically ADHD _podcast. And I'm also on TikTok. I also have a Facebook community called Thrivers, Not Survivors. If you're not already in there, it's free. You can join. Go right ahead. I would love to hear from you. I love to hear from my listeners. I love to hear their success stories, their funny stories, and give you advice. All right, my friends, that is all I have for now. Stay authentic, and we will talk soon.